Yes, so I've been working myself with the European Commission for the last almost 16 years, predominantly working in the area of animal welfare. So I've seen how it's been developing over that period of time. Animal welfare, as it is seen in the context of trade, is something that has been discussed continuously throughout that period, and there have been certainly developments in that line. Just first of all then, I thought I would give a brief overview of animal welfare as it is evolving in the context of the European Union. 1974 then, animals were goods legally. For trade purposes, animals are seen as goods, no different from any box of any product. The first animal welfare laws came into European legislation framework in 1974. I don't think it's any coincidence that Ireland, UK and Denmark joined the EU in 1973, and probably the cultures, I'm Irish, so maybe UK and Denmark might get the credit, but the ethos of animal welfare is something that was inseparable from living animals, was something that came into the EU legislative framework in 1974. There may be other things coming into play at that time as well, a general discussion about intensive farming in particular. But interestingly, the first regulations were to do with slaughter and then to do with transport. The farming regulations came much later, really when the single market was set up at the beginning of the 1990s, when there was a huge amount of EU legislation produced to get the single market into being. Then we had lots of farming rules as well, which brought us to the point in 1997 with Treaty of Amsterdam, and then animals, apart from having pieces of legislation, we have a treaty, which is the Treaty of Rome, which is for the functioning of the European Union. And within that treaty then there was an annex which recognised animals as sentient beings, which was a major landmark. In a way, this is taking a particular definition of animal welfare, which is an important one. It pushes in a certain direction, though, which is in relation to, certainly there's something probably NGOs, animal welfare NGOs campaign for, the recognition of sentience, and it is an important point, I think, from a concept of animal welfare, but it tends to leave other people behind, I think, in terms of the bigger commission. It's seen as a single issue in a way that how do you integrate this sentience into normal business that goes on with animals and animal products. So I think then when we came to 2009 and the Treaty of Lisbon, then the requirement then was that animal welfare should be a more integrated. Again, we don't have a specific article in the treaty. It's not an objective of the European Union to deal with animal welfare, but there is an article in there which asks the European institutions to pay regard to animal welfare when developing policies on the issues where animals are traded and impacted upon through agriculture, fisheries, transport, and so on. The development in that integration has been mixed, I would say. We have a new commission just started with very ambitious ideas about better integration of the services. That's something which I think could benefit animal welfare, because it's the integration which the policy colleagues in Brussels have been struggling to get everybody on board whenever they are talking about any new initiatives on animal welfare. The inputs from the various Directorate Generals can be mixed. Some are quite keen to keep the status quo, others are a little bit more ambitious in relation to integrating the animal welfare dimension. Another big development which has happened in the last 10 or 11 years is the major enlargement to the east, where 2004 saw 10 different member states joining us. Then we had Croatia, well, we had Romania and Bulgaria in 2007, and then Croatia more recently. Yeah, the picture of myself is really to remind myself that the focus was largely on hygiene, that there were a lot of small establishments, particularly in eastern countries. Probably the result of the enlargement was that a lot of the smaller places closed. It probably is a fact of life that the bigger businesses probably benefited and the smaller ones who weren't really meeting the standards went out of business because they weren't able to upgrade sufficiently in relation to the hygiene aspects. So yeah, our focus was working with the competent authorities and getting action plans for their establishments in place that the hygiene would be respected. Hygiene would be seen as kind of the core of our work in the Food and Veterinary Office. Animal health also in the legal sense. Animal welfare then is something which we have included as well over the years. But the initial focus certainly from the government would be getting hygiene rules in place with an integrated approach in relation to taking animal welfare along as well. So where does the EU fit in the bigger picture then in relation to trade? And yeah, well, the first thing people think about when they think about World Trade is the World Trade Organization, which initially was quite clear that animal welfare is not something for trade. It's not a trade issue, not to be considered as a possible barrier to trade. The reason I flagged up the United States is because, interestingly, on the one issue which we do demand our trading partners, the so-called third countries, so the countries where we import meat and meat products from, the United States, like us, demand that those products are derived from animals that have been killed in a humane way, so it's certified on the meat and meat products, which that gives us a route into those countries to assess that those rules are actually being respected. The United States follow the same line. They ask, so both EU and the United States are both major importers of food, which then gives us a very large clout on a global scale of imposing, if you like, animal welfare standards to third countries in slaughterhouses, and I'm only talking about slaughterhouses. Strictly speaking, that would be contrary to WTO rules. Interestingly, whenever we have a new regulation on slaughter, which came into force in 2013, that there was a challenge from India that this was against WTO rules. It's the first time that it's been challenged. So whether that will be upheld or not remains to be seen. I don't think many third countries want to be seen that they're against animal welfare. It sort of goes in business sense. So I don't think that approach will be pursued. But the other point then is that at the moment we don't have the ability to impose requirements for farming standards or transport standards on third countries. Yes, yeah, so welfare at slaughter, as I mentioned, that is something which we can require the exporting countries to respect. We have a new regulation here. Iceland has followed the EU model of rules in relation to welfare at slaughter. It's in part of it's in the agreement with the EU to access the internal market that you fully implement the EU rules. With third countries, we're asking for equivalence, so it's not quite the same. With Iceland, it's full implementation of those rules because it's in the agreement for access to the internal market. So a lot of details there that need to be respected at slaughter level. The welfare during transport is an issue which we've been preoccupied with over the time certainly that I've been in the office and long before as well. Yeah, it's an issue which is out there in the public domain. People can see what goes on in transport, so it's not like a farm where it's behind closed doors or a slaughterhouse. Transport happens out in the public and people see things happening. There's a picture on the left I took in Denmark, and it's just to illustrate that transporters don't get up in the morning and think about regulation. Probably it's not the nature of animal transporters. They're not people who immediately think regulation. They're on the road, they're traveling long distances, staying in different places all over Europe. So it's a difficult one for control people to deal with, because it's a movable target, if you like. So it requires a little bit of analysis of data more than relying on the spot checks. So it needs a combined approach in relation to improve welfare during transport. I think it has improved over the years, but there still is issues with certain member states in relation to the amount of focus that they give the controls that are necessary, because it is a sector that probably will not operate on its own, not like a slaughterhouse sector where they're used to dealing with internal controls, they're used to hygiene requirements and dealing with that. They have retail inspections. Transporters are a lot freer in the way they can operate, and some level of control I think is necessary, certainly on the transport side of things. The picture on the right is what the animal's eye view, if you like, going into a livestock ship. There's still quite a number of animals shipped alive. You know, people have been saying since I've been in the Commission that we should replace the live trade with the meat trade, but the way of the world is people want live animals. They want the so-called fifth quarter. In many of these less well-off countries, they want to have all of the offals and products that maybe wouldn't be processed in European Union establishments. They want to have that because they can get value out of the fifth quarter, as it's called. So what happens is animals end up being transported, and many of them go on ships from EU ports, from Ireland. Ireland being a large agricultural country, it exports 85% of its animal products. So farmers in Ireland would see live transport as a positive thing. Equally, Mediterranean ports quite busy shipping animals. So the animals have to make their way down onto these decks on very large ships. Maybe 2,000 cattle could be held on board one such vessel. So it's quite an exercise organising these transports. Just a few examples then of what's been happening in the farming sector then. And I've just taken the illustration of two areas which has preoccupied us for the last number of years. The laying hens was a directive from 1999. The requirements were to move from the old cages where the animals were kept in quite confined conditions with no enrichment, to larger cages or barn systems such as the one on the right of the screen. That was applicable for new farms from 2002, with a transitional period for 10 years for the already existing farms. The deadline wasn't respected by over half of the member states who missed the deadline. Largely, I think, because of this transitional period, which allowed people to postpone the changes that were needed until the very last moment. As a result, the deadline wasn't met. We're now at the situation where we have two member states found guilty in the Court of Justice. So Italy and Greece both found guilty of non-compliance with that directive. Everybody else has got more or less compliance on the issue. So it's been a painful experience, I think. Maybe some lessons learned in relation to these long transition periods. Retail sector, again, has driven it in certain member states, but it's not uniform. Some member states, probably where animal welfare is higher, the retail sector have helped to promote it, and those member states probably have better chances of compliance. Similar story on the welfare of sows. Again, a directive which came into force 2003, applicable to new farms. Long transitional period. The idea here was that sows would move out of close confinement. So the picture here is of a pig with a tether on it, so the animal is tethered to the floor with a belt going around its middle that's tied to the floor when it's gestating, to move them into free access systems where the animals can move around. Again, that didn't happen by the deadline. It's a bigger sector than the laying hen one, so it's more fragmented. So the deadline has been missed, and we still have some 11 member states going through infringement proceedings. So again, we're getting there, but it takes effort and not something the industry has really embraced. Yeah, just to mention that ethics is a big part of animal welfare. So there was a ban on cat and dog fur which came into place in the middle of 2007, banning the placing of cat and dog fur. So it depends which species you are and how well you are protected. And ethics is a big driver for that, and public perceptions drive legislation. It is a political decision at the end of the day. So yeah, what's happening then to reduce the barriers that we have at an EU level? Then we are working to get better compliance. We're trying to work with the member states, build up their capacities. Inspecting things from our level will not necessarily achieve the goals that are needed, because things are happening at a very large scale. We need more robust veterinary services. We need involvement of the stakeholders at an earlier level. The public as well can play their part. So from the consumer's point of view, to drive animal welfare from a political perspective as well. And the informed public is a driver of change. And the important one as well, I think, from the industry perspective is an international dimension, because they would see that their investment to meet animal welfare standards isn't being respected by competitors in other countries. So the Commission is working closely in particular with OIE, which is the World Animal Health Organization, which has members in all countries across the world almost. Some 157 countries, I think, are members of OIE. Most developed countries and developing countries a lot as well. So the cooperation that's needed there to bring welfare standards into the international dimension, I think, is something which is needed more and more. And I'll conclude on that point just to mention that a lot of information, food and veterinary office reports and so on, are available on the Commission's website. Thanks very much.